is all the folks that do the permitting and inspections on household water supplies and wastewater systems. So as you develop questions after today, and you want to get those questions answered, Chris and I are going to be the people to call, and at the end of the slides I've got our contact information. I know that this presentation is going to result in a lot of the people in the room wondering, what does it mean to them and their property, okay? So if you have specific questions that we won't have time to answer today, you can call or email us and you can say, here's my address. How am I going to be affected by this ordinance that's going to be implemented by 2015? And we'll look in our records and we'll tell you all the information that we know, and based on that we'll be able to say you're likely to have to do X, Y, or Z, okay? Now, a lot of the things I'm going to talk about this afternoon are based on the lot size and the amount of wastewater produced on that lot. And I had one of my folks draw up that map there, okay? And there's a typo on there, which you'll notice if you look at it closely, okay? But anyway, I was hoping that people would be able to identify their property on that aerial photograph. And if the property is outlined in red, it means it's less than 3/4 of an acre. And if it's outlined in green, it means it's 3/4 of an acre or greater. Actually, it means it's greater than 3/4 of an acre if we found that there was no property that was exactly 3/4 of an acre out to 3 decimal places. So anyway, what I'm about to talk about is going to bear upon lot size. And if you're not sure what size your lot is, there's a pretty good rough guess. Okay, now I have seen people look at this kind of information and say, wait a minute, my survey on my property says I've got a larger acreage. And those folks have gone to the county assessor and shown some documentation, and the county assessor has changed the number. I saw this happen in Sandia Knolls over on the other side of the mountain recently, where we, according to our records, the lot size was like 0.72, and the lady had information that showed it was like 0.77. So somewhere that little bit of that acreage was lost, and the county assessor recognized her survey, and it had an influence on the kind of septic system that she had to install. So with that information, let me just proceed into the presentation. I'll go roughly 30 minutes, and then we can just go into discussion after that. So if you'll hold your questions till the end, we'll try to get as many of them answered. Anywhere you go in the country where there are septic systems, some governmental agency is looking at those, issuing permits for their construction, doing final inspections after it's built. And it's all about protecting our health, okay? So this is nothing new to most of you, but consider the economic aspects. If you've got a well-functioning septic system on your property, it gives you the full benefit of enjoyment of your property. If you have a puddle of sewage in your backyard, then that creates a problem. So that's kind of the long and short of it. So I just want to go over some very basic, like here's the components of a basic septic system, okay? You'll notice in this photograph those two little pipes right underneath that window. Those are clean out connections, so that if there was a clog, you'd be able to get in there and, you know, push the clog out either forward or back. That is the top of the septic tank. Those black pipes are called risers, and they should come up to or near the surface so that you can remember where your septic tank is and gain access to it to pump it out with some frequency every few years or so. That's a side view of a septic tank. So there on the left is where the sewage from the home is coming in. Solids settle out in the first compartment. The black water collects in the second compartment, and that's the water that goes out into the disposal field. So as you can see, that sludge is going to build up on the bottom. As that builds up, the ability of the tank to do its work to treat the sewage decreases. At some point, that sludge would fill that compartment, providing no place for the bacteria to do their work, which is just another reason why you want to pump out your septic tank periodically. That picture was taken, I think, in the South Valley, but it's just a typical gravel trench, and there in the foreground of that picture you can see a white pipe with a T that's sending the wastewater down a perforated pipe that's underneath that gravel. And as the bottom of that trench clogs up over the years, the wastewater moves slowly, slowly, slowly further down the trench. Trenches like that should last, you know, a good 25, 30 years or more. That is a septic tank on sloping terrain in the East Mountains. So I'm just trying to orient people to kind of the basics of septic systems here. Those are trenches for that same septic tank also in the East Mountains, and those trenches are not filled with gravel, they're filled with a plastic chamber. But the principle is the same. As the bottom of the trench clogs up, the wastewater moves further and further down the trench. In either case, whether you've got a gravel drain field or these plastic chambers, the principle is that we're using the soil beneath the trenches and in the trenches to treat the wastewater. So by the time any of that water gets down to the groundwater, it's essentially been filtered out of all of the dangerous things. Okay, so soil is an excellent media for removing those contaminants, and you need about 4 feet deep of soil to achieve that level of treatment. In Sandia Heights and in the East Mountains, that 4-foot depth of soil is sometimes hard to achieve. There's a lot of rock outcroppings. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that because I want to move through the presentation quickly. But this is just to say that there's a lot happening in that septic tank and in that soil that basically makes that wastewater less and less polluting as it moves through the system, and that system being the tank and the soil. And there's a lot of science and biology and chemistry and physics that goes into this, and perhaps some of you know more about it than I do. But anyway, if you want to just take a minute to just read that. And if you have questions about this at the end, we can answer those. All right, let's get to why everybody's here. What happens in 2015? Okay. Let me go back to the year 2000 first to explain. In 2000, Bernalillo County established a new wastewater code. Okay, we're the only county in the state that has its own wastewater regulations aside from the state of New Mexico. Anywhere else you go in the state, the New Mexico Environment Department has regulatory authority and issues the permits and does the inspections on septic systems. In 2000, or in 1998, 1999, it became clear that the local code was not as strict as the state code. And by law, we have to be at least as strict in order to implement our own program. So we implemented a code that was actually more strict than the state at that time. So in 2000, this new ordinance came into effect. And that ordinance basically said that if your lot size is less than 3/4 of an acre and the wastewater flow is greater than a certain amount, the amount of treatment that you have to provide to that wastewater is going to be greater, okay? Greater than what you would find in a typical septic tank. So it essentially becomes having a small-scale wastewater treatment plant on your property. In some of these cases, it's got moving parts and machinery and requires electrical power, and it requires more attention and more maintenance than a typical wastewater system. This was based on studies that showed that the nitrates in the groundwater were increasing throughout the county, and in the long term, prevention is a lot less expensive than cure.